The morning I found out, I was standing in our kitchen in Bozeman, Montana, holding a coffee mug I'd bought at a gas station in 1997, the one with the chipped handle I'd superglued back twice. It said, "World's Okayest Everything," in faded letters, and I remember thinking that was exactly right. That was exactly what I had become inside that marriage. The world's okayest everything. Invisible, manageable, convenient. My husband, Garrett, was upstairs getting dressed for work. I could hear the shower running, the specific creak of the third floorboard when he stepped on it, all the sounds I knew the way you know the sounds of your own heartbeat, without listening, without thinking, and I was standing there, mug in hand, reading a text message on his phone that he'd left face up on the counter. A mistake so ordinary it was almost insulting. He hadn't even been careful. The text was from a contact saved as K, freelance. 6 words. 6 words that took approximately 4 seconds to read and approximately the rest of my life to process. Can't wait to start our family. I put the mug down. I didn't drop it. I set it down, gently, on the counter, and I stood there and I breathed. That was the beginning. That was the clock starting. Welcome back to Ravage Stories, where secrets come out, betrayals get exposed, and the people who thought they'd get away with it never do. If you're new here, subscribe, join the family. You're going to want to be here for what comes next. Drop a comment where you are listening from. It means a lot to me. Now let's go. My name is Danielle. I was 37 years old when this happened. I am 39 now, and I want to tell you that I feel approximately 100 years younger. I work in medical billing, have for 12 years, out of an office on the north side of Bozeman, the kind of office with fluorescent lights that hum in a frequency specifically designed to give you a headache by 2 in the afternoon. I grew up in Billings, 45 minutes east, in a house where my mother ironed every piece of clothing we owned because she said presentation was the one thing nobody could take from you. She ironed my father's work shirts, my school blouses, her own church dress, all of it. When I started dating Garrett, I ironed a blouse before our third date and then stood in the bathroom and laughed at myself, thinking, "You are your mother's daughter down to the bone." I meant it as a joke. I understand now it was a compliment. Garrett Holt was 39 when we met, 5 years older than me, and he walked into a room the way some men do, like the room had been waiting for him. He sold commercial real estate, traveled the state, sometimes into Wyoming and Idaho. He wore good boots and knew how to order wine, and he laughed at my jokes the way nobody had laughed at my jokes in a long time. My mother called him charming. She said it the way people in Billings say charming, as a warning dressed up as a compliment. I didn't hear it that way then. We married in 2016, a small ceremony outside of town where the mountains go blue in the evening and the air smells like pine and cold creek water. I wore my grandmother's earrings. I did not have a prenuptial agreement, a fact that a very competent attorney would later tell me was both understandable and unfortunate in roughly equal measure. For 7 years, I was a good wife. I want to be clear about what that means, because it means different things to different people. In my case, it meant working full-time and contributing my full paycheck to our shared accounts, while Garrett's commission income fluctuated dramatically, and I never once brought it up. It meant keeping the house, managing the bills, organizing the taxes, maintaining the health insurance for both of us through my employer. It meant making room, shrinking myself into the shape of whatever space was left over after Garrett occupied his portion of our life. I didn't resent it at the time, because I didn't name it. Once you name a thing, you have to deal with it. Her name was Kira. She was 26, a property coordinator at one of the firms Garrett worked with out of Missoula. I found this out later, much later, and deliberately. The morning I read that text, I knew nothing except the 6 words and the fact that my hands were completely steady when they had no right to be. Garrett came downstairs, poured his coffee, picked up his phone, and said, "You look tired. You sleep okay?" And I looked at him, at the man I had given 7 years and 2 relocated career opportunities to, and I said, "Fine, just fine." He kissed me on the cheek and left. The door closed. I stood in that kitchen for a long time. Here is what I want you to understand about what happened next. I did not react. That is the most important sentence in this entire story. I did not react. I had spent enough years in medical billing, tracking errors, catching discrepancies, building paper trails for insurance disputes that insurance companies desperately wanted to disappear, to know that the moment you show your hand, you lose your leverage. I put his phone back exactly where he'd left it, face up, same angle. I finished my coffee. I drove to work. Over the next 3 weeks, I built a picture. I did not touch his phone again. I did not go through his email. I am going to be very clear about methodology here, because some of what I did exists in legally interesting territory, and some of it is bulletproof, and I knew the difference. What I did was observe. I paid attention to patterns I'd been too trusting to notice before. The Tuesday and Thursday evenings he worked late, every week without variation, going back at least 8 months if I counted the calendar I kept for scheduling purposes. The mileage on the truck that didn't match the routes he described. The way he'd started talking about our finances with a new specificity, asking how much I had in my individual savings, what my 401k balance looked like, whether I'd thought about whether we needed both names on the investment account. Innocent questions from a certain angle, not innocent from mine. In week 4, I called my cousin Bethany, who is a paralegal in Helena and who has the specific combination of qualities most useful in a crisis. She is calm, she is organized, and she is furious on my behalf in a way that never interferes with her efficiency. I told her what I knew. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Okay, listen to me. Don't move any money, don't change any accounts, don't let him know you know. What we need first is documentation." She said it the way you say something you've said before professionally, and I loved her for it. Bethany drove up from Helena that weekend with a bag of groceries, a bottle of wine we rationed carefully over 2 days, and a folder, green, standard issue, the kind you buy at any office supply store. She sat at my kitchen table, and we mapped out everything I had observed. Bank statements I was legally entitled to access, mileage records from the shared truck insurance app, a calendar going back 10 months. She made a list of what we had and what we still needed. "You need his voice," she said. "You need him talking." She was right. In Montana, you need to know your recording law, and Montana is a one-party consent state for in-person conversations, meaning I could record any conversation I was a participant in. I want to be precise here. In person. Phone calls between parties in different states carry different analysis, and I am not a lawyer, but Bethany knew enough to keep me inside the lines. The folder went into my car, under the driver's seat. That was where it lived for the next 2 months. Every time I got in my car, I felt it there. Solid. Growing. The conversation I needed happened because I manufactured the conditions for it, and I want to be honest about that. Week 5. A Tuesday night, Garrett home late, the specific late that had a different texture than ordinary late. I'd made dinner, left his plate covered on the counter, and when he came in, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of water and what I can only describe as the most precisely calibrated expression of sadness I have ever constructed. Chin down, eyes forward, still. He stopped. He said, "What's wrong?" Not a question, a statement. The way you say something when you already know the answer and you're calculating how much it's going to cost you. "I just feel like something's been off between us," I said. "I don't know what I'm doing wrong. And Garrett, this is the part where I have to take a breath, even now." Garrett sat down across from me and he said, "Danielle, I need to be honest with you." He folded his hands on the table. He looked at me with the expression of a man who has been practicing something in his car on the drive home, and he told me that he had been seeing someone, that he cared about her, that he had been trying to figure out the right time, that he thought we'd grown in different directions. He said it in the careful, therapized language of someone who has been told by someone else how to say it, and every word of it was recorded on the phone in my cardigan pocket set to voice memo, screen dark, lying flat against my ribs. He cried a little. This is the part I almost feel bad about, and then I remember the start our family text, and I don't. He cried and said he didn't want to hurt me, and that he'd always care about me, and I sat across from him with tears running down my face. Real tears, because I want to be clear, I was genuinely grieving something. I just wasn't grieving what he thought I was grieving. And I said, "Please don't leave. Please. Can you just give us more time?" He held my hands across the table. He said he'd think about it. He stayed. For the next 6 weeks, Garrett stayed in the house, in the marriage, in the pretense, and I used every one of those weeks, not because I wanted him there, because I needed him there, talking, confirming, explaining, while the folder under my seat got heavier. In week 7, he mentioned that he and Kira had talked about the future. In week 8, he mentioned casually, over dinner, that he'd be consulting with someone about the financial side of things. He meant a divorce attorney. He was warning me in a language he thought I didn't speak. He was wrong, and that is when I told him I was pregnant. I want to pause here, because this is the part where people have a lot of feelings, and I understand that. So let me explain exactly what I did and exactly what I did not do. I told my husband I was pregnant. I am not going to tell you whether I used a fraudulent test, because that is a conversation for a different context. What I will tell you is that I told him I was pregnant, and that I watched his face cycle through approximately 11 distinct emotions in 4 seconds, the most revealing 4 seconds of our entire marriage. There was panic, there was calculation, there was something that looked almost like guilt, which is the one that stayed with me. He recovered into concern. He said, "How? When did you find out?" I said I'd just taken the test. I said I was scared. I said I didn't know what we were going to do. What we were going to do, what Garrett was going to do, became extremely clear over the next 4 days. He called Kira. I know this because he called her from the driveway at 11:30 at night, and I stood at the upstairs window in the dark and watched him pace next to the truck for 40 minutes. The next morning, he was quieter. He started being kind to me in the specific way of someone who is managing a situation. He bought groceries without being asked. He asked how I was feeling. He told me everything was going to be okay. He was buying himself time while he figured out what his options were, and I was standing right next to him, entirely aware of this, adding everything to the record. 3 weeks into the pregnancy, Garrett told me, sitting at the same kitchen table, same folded hands, that he had ended things with Kira. He said it was something that almost looked like relief, and for a moment I wondered if he was telling me the truth. Then he said, "I want to do this right. I want us to work." And I thought, you want your name off the birth certificate without a paternity dispute. You want the clean exit that a reconciliation narrative gives you. You want the story where you came back. I gave him the story. I was not done yet, because here is what was happening simultaneously. Bethany had connected me with a family law attorney in Bozeman, a woman named Patricia Voss who had been practicing for 22 years and who had, in her words, seen every version of this particular movie. She reviewed what I had, the recorded conversations, 3 of them by that point, each properly dated, each within the legal parameters Bethany had helped me map, the financial documentation, the call records I had access to through the shared family plan, the folder which had migrated from under my seat to Patricia's office, where it lived in a proper legal file with my name on it. Patricia looked at it all, made some notes, and said, "You have enough. You have more than enough." She paused. "Is there anything else you want him to say before we proceed?" There was. I needed him to confirm, on record, that he had planned to leave during the marriage, not because the state of Montana required it for divorce proceedings, but because Garrett had a specific professional situation that made it relevant. He worked, as I mentioned, in commercial real estate, but the more specific truth is that Garrett's largest client, a development group based in Billings, was owned by his uncle, a deeply religious man named Franklin Holt, who had built his entire professional identity around family values and who went to church twice on Sundays. Franklin had been instrumental in getting Garrett established. He had co-signed on Garrett's first office lease, he had sent business to Garrett for 11 years, and Franklin had, on multiple occasions, told Garrett directly that the reason he trusted him with the family business was that Garrett had built something solid, a home, a wife, stability. Franklin Holt had no idea about Kira. He had no idea about any of it. Garrett's colleagues at the brokerage had even less idea, specifically the partners who had just approved a significant expansion of his book of business on the basis of a character evaluation that included, and I am not making this up, a section on professional integrity and personal stability. I know this because the evaluation form was a document Garrett had left in our shared filing cabinet, which I was legally entitled to access, and which Bethany had photographed and added to the file. The last conversation I needed happened in the 7th week of the fake pregnancy. I had told Garrett I was scheduled for a first appointment with the OB/GYN the following Thursday. He said he'd come. Of course he'd come. He was performing reconciliation like a man who needed the audience. The night before that appointment, which I had no intention of attending, I sat down with him at the kitchen table again, and I said I was scared. I said I needed to hear from him that we were solid, that we were choosing each other, that there was no one else. And Garrett, looking at me across the same table where he had sat 4 months earlier and told me about Kira, told me that she had meant nothing, that it was a mistake, that he had told her he was choosing his family. He said these things into the air of our kitchen and into the microphone of the phone in my cardigan pocket, and I nodded and I said thank you, and I made us both tea. Thursday morning, I drove to Patricia Voss's office instead of the OB/GYN. Bethany drove up from Helena again. The 3 of us sat in Patricia's office with the full file on the table, the green folder now supplemented by 3 manila folders and a USB drive, and we finalized the plan. Patricia filed the divorce petition that afternoon. She had already prepared the asset disclosure request and the motion for an accounting of marital funds, because the financial conversations Garrett had been having, the questions about my savings, the account name inquiries, suggested the very real possibility of dissipation of marital assets, and Patricia wanted that motion in front of a judge before Garrett had any idea the petition existed. Service of process happened on a Friday afternoon at the brokerage office where Garrett was in a meeting with 2 colleagues and, I later learned, had just poured himself a cup of coffee. The process server walked in, asked for Garrett Holt by name, and handed him the papers in front of those colleagues. Garrett called my cell phone 4 times in the following 6 minutes. I did not answer. That evening, I called Franklin Holt. This is the part I want to be careful about, because I am not going to tell you I felt good about everything I did, but I am going to tell you that what I shared with Franklin Holt was true. All of it was true, and Franklin had a right to know the character of the man he had been vouching for professionally, and that is how I justified it then and how I justify it now. I sent Franklin 3 things: a summary letter that Patricia had reviewed, a copy of the first recorded conversation, the one where Garrett described his plans with Kira in his own words, and a photograph from Garrett's phone that Garrett had texted to me months earlier, before any of this began, before I knew anything. A photograph from a trip to Missoula that I had believed at the time was a work conference. Franklin was 71 years old and deeply traditional, and he listened to that recording in his home in Billings, and he made a phone call to the brokerage partners by 9 o'clock the next morning. Garrett was placed on administrative review pending the completion of that character evaluation process that had previously gone so well. 2 weeks later, he resigned. I was told by someone who was in the office that day that he cleaned out his desk in about 11 minutes, which is actually kind of funny when I let myself think about it, because Garrett Holt was a man who had an opinion about the correct way to fold a napkin. 11 minutes, one box. Then I told him the pregnancy was not real. I did not send him a letter. I did not have Patricia notify him. I told him myself, on the phone, because I wanted to say it and I wanted to hear the silence afterward. I said, "There is no baby, Garrett. There never was. Everything you said in this house for the last 2 months, every conversation, every confession, I have it. My attorney has it. And now I'm telling you clearly, for the record, that there was no pregnancy." The silence lasted long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then he said my name once, just my name, and I said, "The petition's been filed, talk to your lawyer," and I ended the call. The divorce was finalized 14 months later. Montana is an equitable distribution state, not community property, and the word equitable does a lot of work in a courtroom when one spouse has documented financial inquiries consistent with planning for asset dissipation, and the other spouse has 14 months of impeccable documentation. Patricia Voss is very good at her job. The marital home, which we had purchased jointly in 2019 for $212,000 and which had appreciated considerably, was awarded to me, along with an equitable share of the investment accounts and a settlement figure that reflected the court's view of 7 years of documented financial contribution. I am not going to give you the number because it's mine, and I'm still protective of it, but I will tell you that it was enough to pay off the mortgage and start over with something left. I drove away from the courthouse in Bozeman with Bethany in the passenger seat, and she held up the gas station coffee she bought on the way in and said, "To the world's okayest everything," because I had told her about the mug once, and she remembered, because she is that kind of person. I have the mug still. I stopped using it when Garrett and I split, not because of any particular symbolism, but because the handle finally cracked all the way through and super glue wasn't going to hold it a third time. I have it on a shelf in the kitchen of the house that is now mine. I look at it sometimes. I don't feel sad about it. Garrett moved to Missoula within 6 months of the divorce, which is where Kira was. I don't know what happened between them, and that is the absolute truth. I don't know, and I have not tried to find out, because the moment those divorce papers were signed and that settlement was in place, Garrett Holt became a story that was finished, not one I needed to keep reading. I hope he is living in the specific discomfort of a man who underestimated the person across the breakfast table for 7 years and will never fully understand how wrong he was. That is not bitterness. That is just what I hope. Bethany made partner at her firm in Helena 8 months ago. I sent her flowers, the good kind, the arrangement with the dahlias, not the grocery store kind, though honestly she would have loved either. She is that kind of person too. Here's what I carried out of this. Documentation is not paranoia. Documentation is protection. Before I knew what was happening, I had 12 years of organized medical billing records and the habit of writing things down. Those habits saved me in ways I did not anticipate when I developed them. Whatever you are keeping track of, keep track of it. Not because you expect something to go wrong, because when things go wrong, they go wrong fast, and you need to already have the habit. The moment you react is the moment you lose the advantage. I want you to hear this. I stood in my kitchen with that text message in front of me, and I set the mug down, and I breathed, and I did not react. Every good thing that followed came from that choice, not from anger, not from confrontation, not from showing my hand, from stillness and from strategy and from giving myself enough time to think clearly before I did anything irreversible. That stillness was the hardest work I have ever done. There is no substitute for good counsel. Find your Bethany. Find your Patricia Voss. Find the person who knows the law, who knows the procedure, who can tell you what you can legally record and what you can't, who can file the asset motion before the other side knows to hide things. Ask for help before you need it desperately. Build the team before you're in crisis. And this one I say quietly, because it still moves something in me when I think about it. Dignity does not require a performance. I ironed my blouse before every appointment with Patricia, not because Patricia cared what I was wearing, because my mother taught me that presentation is the one thing nobody can take from you, and I wanted to walk into every room in that process feeling like myself, like the woman who had built a real life and was now, methodically, reclaiming it. There is a version of this story where I fell apart. I was allowed to fall apart. I chose not to, mostly, and the moments when I did, alone in my car in the parking garage, twice, I let myself have them, and then I drove home and I added another page to the folder. The folder is gone now. Patricia shredded what needed shredding after the final decree. The rest I burned in the backyard on a cold October evening in Montana, which sounds dramatic and was genuinely satisfying. The fire was small and it was done in 12 minutes, and I stood there and watched the ash, and then I went inside and made dinner. Here's the question I keep thinking about, and I want to leave it with you. At what point does protecting yourself become something more than protection, and does it matter? I have asked myself this. I have sat with it. I told my husband I was pregnant when I was not, and I did it deliberately, and it gave me the time and the recorded evidence that changed the outcome of my divorce settlement. Was it wrong? I am not going to answer that for you. I know what I think. I know what I was up against. I know who left the coffee mug chipped on the counter and who left the text message face up on the counter next to it. I know what I carried in that 7 years, and I know what I walked away with. I'll let you decide what you would have done. If this story hit you somewhere real, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, share it with the person who needs to hear it. I'll see you soon.